Hi everyone, welcome to the seminar. Nice to see you all here. This is a research note seminar hosted by the Resources Environment and Development Group at Crawford. My name is Simon West. I'm a researcher here at the Crawford School. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're hosting a lecture on the lands of the sovereign and unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So today we're honoured to have someone that you probably all know very well, Professor Sango Mahanty, and she's going to talk about her exciting new research project in a talk titled Toxic Chickens, Chemical Flows and Accumulations in Asia's Broiler Chicken Complex. So yeah, many of you will know Sango's biography already, but for those of you that are visiting and joining online, Sango is a professor with us in the Reed Group here at Crawford. She's a critical geographer who studies the politics of green economies, frontier markets, and nature society transformations in Cambodia and Vietnam. Her most recent book is called Unsettled Frontiers, Market Formation in the Cambodia-Vietnam Borderlands, and was published with Cornell University Press in 2022. So the structure of the session is that Sango will talk for about 35 minutes or so, and then we'll open up for about 20-25 minutes of questions at the end. We'll be recording the presentation, if that's okay, Sango, but we'll turn off the recording for the Q&A portion. And if those joining on Zoom, you can just remember to keep your mics on mute during the presentation, that'd be great. And we'll bring you into the discussions at the end. Cool, so over to you, Sango.
Thank you, Simon. And it's really nice to have a chance to talk to colleagues about this new research. I probably won't go for 30 minutes actually, because this talk is based on a paper that I presented at the Political Ecology Network conference back in June, which was held in Lund in Sweden. And I'd sort of talked to Simon before that it would be really nice to share that paper here as well, since I'm kind of developing it and putting the time into it. So those talks were, I ran them very tightly as a panel convener at 12 minutes each. So I had quite a bit that I could add into it, but I don't think we'll need 30 minutes. So I'll be really happy to have some discussion around this afterwards. Also, I feel like a number of my colleagues have really been on the project design journey with me and have heard sort of different slices of this project. So I guess what you'll see today is sort of where we got to in terms of the project design. And I guess it's a little unusual to share research that is at the front end. I won't have findings to talk about today. So it's really, I guess, talking through our logic and rationale for doing this new research and how we're planning to approach it. And so with my colleagues and I, who I don't know if Asa and Beck, they were thinking they might try and drop in online. Tilda is in a completely different time zone. So I know definitely she will not be here, but I'm presenting this on behalf of our whole research group as well. And also we have several nationally based collaborators in the countries that I'll be talking about. So just to kind of, I guess, dissipate, come in. I think there's some people outside. Come and grab a seat. There's some spots over here. Plenty of seats over here. Yeah, so just to kind of avoid any suspense about what the talk is going to cover, there's a few headline points that I'm going to speak to today. So essentially this project speaks into kind of an emerging and quite significant wave of critical meat scholarship. Probably many of you don't know this wave is going on at the moment. But it is, and it's a super exciting field, actually, that I've been kind of immersed in over the last year or so, kind of reading and thinking about. And it really is about understanding the current industrial meat complex that we're sort of living with at a planetary level. And so, in a sense, our starting point is sort of building on, we sort of take that literature and we're sort of adding to that. And our research is especially going to explore the place of agricultural chemicals within this meat complex. I'll explain more by what I mean by the meat complex in a moment as well. Through the case of the broiler chicken industry. And we want to understand how the meat complex is shaping the use of agricultural and veterinary chemicals, and then what that in turn means for the intensification of risks to environments, to people, and multi-species relations. So I'm going to elaborate on all of those points as we go through. Donna Haraway fans here. I know there are a few of you. So this provocation comes from Donna Haraway's book, When Species Meet. And she says, follow the chicken and find the world. And in a way, our research is bringing this idea to life. And the picture to the right here is of Ross, or Ross 308 to be precise. And this is one of the most commonly used breeds of chicken in the broiler chicken industry. The other key variety is called Cobb 500. Ross has been bred for optimal productivity and to hold weight around the areas that are most desired by consumers, especially breasts and thighs. And Ross weighs in at about 5 times what broiler chickens did in the 1950s. So you can see where they've got to with genetic modification here, but is unable to survive without quite heavy human intervention. Ross is genetically owned, or the genetics of Ross are owned by a German company, the EW Group. And the Cobb breed is owned by the American company Tyson Foods. So Ross and Cobb, I haven't been able to find these figures, but actually in our pollen panel, I learned that about 93% of the world's broiler chickens belong to Ross or Cobb varieties. So they are kind of planetary level dominant in that sense, these two varieties of chicken. So Ross and Cobb sit within a hyper-connected industrial food system in which meat production absorbs a growing share of resources and investment. And this goes alongside a major growth in global meat consumption, whereby meat, and especially pork and chicken, I'll show you some figures in a minute, have become more central in human diets. The geographer Tony Weiss calls this trend meatification. And chicken production is exemplary of the patterns and challenges that are associated with meatification. Chicken consumption has been growing exponentially around the world, and broiler chickens rely on global flows of feed crops like maize and soy to support contract-based and factory farming. And broilers embodied the contradictions and risks as well of our industrial meat complex. So all of this is to say that we sort of agree with Haraway that that chickens and Ross and Cobb hold crucial insights on the logics and contradictions that underpin industrial meat production. Okay, so this graph represents global consumption of meat from 1961 to 2021, based on FAO data. So you can see here that the amount of meat consumed per person has roughly doubled. It's grown from around 20 kilos per person per year to about 43 kilos per person per year. And this doubling in consumption rates has involved a dramatic expansion, especially of poultry and pork, which are the bottom two segments of that chart. And some researchers suggest that this rapid and massive expansion of the planetary chicken population that's kind of constitutes or has grown to meet that demand, if you like, has made broiler chickens a signal species of the Anthropocene. So there's a whole kind of discussion on whether we are in fact in a chicken-ocene, which was the title of one of the papers in our political ecology panel a few weeks ago. All right, so Tony Weiss's concept of meatification was put forward in 2013 to kind of capture this trend. And meatification is both about the amount of meat consumed per capita, as well as the centering of meat within diets increasingly around the world. But meatification is not a uniform pattern. It also follows geographical and social disparities, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So we suggest that, we see a trend like that and somehow take it as normal and inevitable. But we suggest that meatification is not natural, inevitable, or benign, but stems from a flourishing and what in many respects may be an unsustainable industrial grain, oilseed, livestock complex. So his book kind of maps out what this complex looks like. And we're taking on the idea of an industrial meat complex in our research. And the use of the term complex, I don't know if, some of you will be familiar with that and it might be new to others. So I thought I'd just expand on what I mean there. In Weiss's work, it has a very particular meaning. So it's taking a political economy lens to livestock production and looking at how it relates to particular processes of capitalist development and expansion. Weiss characterises the livestock complex as soaring populations of a few livestock species that are reared in high densities, disarticulated from the surrounding monocultural fields. So you've got this sort of geographically disparate processes that support this intensive, rearing of livestock. And as an analytical lens, this political economy-based conceptualization of a livestock complex, it goes a bit further than other familiar lenses like value chains. For instance, a value chain might think about key stages in the production of a commodity like chicken meat. Who are the key actors? Where does value addition and extraction occur, and so on? But the analytic of the livestock complex turns our attention to corporate interests and actors, sort of systemic relationships and factors that might come into play, and that sort of underpin and drive industrial meat production. So in a way, it's kind of both a broader way of thinking about kind of industrial livestock and I guess broiler chickens in our case, but also it's a deeper way because it allows you to go into a range of different sort of embedded processes and drivers that might be at play. For instance, the meat complex might encompass the land relations that enable the production of maize and soy crops, and for them to flourish and boom in order to feed livestock. It speaks to the vertical integration of production systems, whereby large agribusiness corporations, some of the key ones around poultry are mentioned there, or broiler chickens are mentioned there, where they control a growing share of feed crop production as well as livestock rearing, slaughtering, processing, and even marketing through supermarkets. One of the companies I'll mention later CP Group runs supermarkets throughout the region, throughout the Asian region as well. So the complex also reflects specific kinds of human and non-human relations that Catherine Gillespie calls colonial capitalist relations. And she's relating that idea to the relationships between species. And she talks about how farm animals become sites of production and capital accumulation, their bodies genetically coded for commoditization, and their short lives organised around logics of extraction. So it kind of brings other species into a particular set of relationships with human society as well. So I guess just to bring that together, viewed as a complex, we can kind of gain a holistic view of the drivers, the connections, relationships, the implications and risks associated with industrial livestock, and especially broiler chickens, which is our focus, what it means for environments, for human and animal health, food security, climate change, and other processes. So this is just kind of a very basic schematic that we've got here, which the idea will be to really expand and complicate it, I guess. Okay. No time. All right. So turning then to Asia, which is our geographical focus as well. And Asia is obviously a very large region in its own right, and we're not trying to cover every country here. So turning to Asia, some really important work was done by Jacobson and Hansen, and actually RV Hansen is part of our advisory group for the project. So their work observed, well, sort of, I guess, mapped out what was going on in the Asian context, and they found that there was a differentiated geography of meat consumption and production across the region, and we can see that in this mapping of FAO statistics for production along the top of poultry, or I should say broiler chickens, and because poultry can also include chickens that are producing eggs. And consumption patterns along the bottom, which my colleague Rebecca Hamilton produced for us. Okay, so you can see that there is sort of disparity in terms of the trajectory that this meatification trend, or especially around chicken meat, is taking in each of the countries there. But these disparities also play out along socioeconomic lines within the countries that are shown here. So although some policymakers and researchers talk about kind of this current expansion in meat as being some kind of democratization of access to meat and to protein, we need to keep in mind that this kind of access usually reflects existing contours of social differentiation and inequality within countries. Nevertheless, the overall trend in the region is still one of significant growth in both the production and consumption of broiler chickens. The latest FAO statistics show that Asia now accounts for about 40% of global chicken production, and that this is likely to grow in the future. And I guess the work by Jacobson and Hansen sort of explores why is this occurring in Asia, and they sort of discuss various socioeconomic changes as well as cultural shifts that have driven kind of that growing demand for broiler chickens, as well as expanding export markets as well, because there's quite a lot of exports going on from there. All right, so to bring, that's just by way of setting the context around why, I guess, industrial livestock production is quite a major issue that we should be thinking about, how chickens and broiler chickens specifically kind of fit into that, some of the trends in our region. And yeah, I guess overall, you know, we're sort of taking this current meatification trend and booming of broiler chicken production as a starting point that we're speaking into. And in this context, we see broiler chickens as kind of a critical case that could provide some important insights on this wider industrial meat complex. And especially we plan to explore chemical use and accumulation of chemicals within this sphere. Why are we interested in chemicals? So essentially we came to the industrial broiler chicken, to Ross, from a prior study that our group conducted on chemical pollution into river basins, and that research was funded by our college from our very own Asia Pacific Innovation Program in CAT. So impacts of that in action here. So our group used this funding to review what was currently known, sort of the state of research on water pollution in two of Asia's largest river basins, the Ganges-Brahmaputra Basin and the Mekong Basin. And I've actually put that's now been published as of June. So if anyone's interested in seeing the findings of that, I can it's open access, so I can send a copy around. So we found that in this study that agricultural chemicals are now clocking as a major water pollutant in both of these basins. Studies on these basins document over 56 pollutants from the pervasive use of pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, and antibiotics in agro-industries. And these include persistent organic pollutants or forever chemicals that accumulate and disrupt biological processes. So I guess from that study, we had an interest in exploring the use of agricultural chemicals. And it seems like, with the boom in broiler chicken production and the need for feed crops to sustain that boom, there seemed to be a connection that could be explored here. The other important aspect of chemical use is that evidence is also growing about agrochemical absorption into human and non-human bodies. For instance, our colleague Annie Shattuck, who's also on our advisory group for the project, has worked on pesticide use in Laos and is documenting some of these issues there. And the International Labour Organization has also documented the risks of working with these chemicals and how they're often shouldered by the most vulnerable, like agricultural labourers. So I think there's a growing body of work on what chemical use means for the people that work with them as well. So yeah, I guess knowing that industrial broiler production relies strongly on maize and soy and usually grown through monocultural practices, and an assemblage of things like high yielding seeds, fertilizers, insecticides, pesticides, and a range of supportive government policies, corporate investments. We wanted to really explore this as a case study to try and understand what's happening in that chemical space. With one study from 2021 showed that the use of agricultural inputs in Southeast Asia rose by around 400%. Talking about things like fertilizers and pesticides, etc. So and at the same time, there's been quite a massive expansion or boom in these crops like maize, especially in mainland Southeast Asia. So yeah, it's really about exploring some of these agricultural shifts and how they fit into the broiler chicken boom, and especially the role of chemicals within that process. And that kind of speaks to the level of farms and spaces where the feed crops are being grown. But chemical use is also relevant when these crops are turned into animal feed and in the rearing of broiler chickens, where veterinary drugs come into play. So antibiotics are integral to hygiene and healthcare practices in factory farmed poultry. And my co-investigator here, Asadoran, is doing more detailed work on this in the Indian context, but also it's being picked up in a range of projects actually internationally. It's quite a hot topic, the spread of antimicrobial resistance through the use of antibiotics in livestock. And we don't have a clear grasp, I guess, in the context of broiler chicken production, how these antibiotics are administered, where they go after they're administered to broiler chickens, and also the other question of how the chemicals that are used in feed crops and so on, do they accumulate, for instance, as they pass along the food chain? So very little is known about some of these issues, but they could be quite consequential for human health, food safety, and a range of, and obviously environmentally as well. For instance, a study from 2019, which was a kind of a review piece that looked at the use of chicken manure from poultry farms, was cautioning against using manure from these intensive poultry farms as a fertilizer, saying that the practice is causing chemical, pathogen, and heavy metal contamination in ground and surface waters, as well as killing soil microbes. So in general, I guess, this is all pointing to, potentially significant risks for environments and people and other species. And I guess there's also quite a big sort of knowledge gap around it. And so that's kind of what we're speaking into here. Okay, so that's sort of by way of setting the context for our project, which is called Planet Chicken: Chemical Entanglements in Asia's Poultry Boom, which was funded by under the ARC's Discovery Scheme in the previous round, and it's due to start in October this year. So the research aims to better understand this nexus between the Asian broiler chicken boom, agrochemical use, and I guess veterinary chemical use, and the social, environmental, and justice implications of that. So we take a political ecology approach to studying these chemical entanglements, which means that agrochemicals and their use isn't studied in isolation, but is contextualized within this understanding of the political economy and systemic relationships that make up this broiler chicken complex. And the study will focus on two emerging broiler chicken producers, which is India and Vietnam, and a more established producer, which is Thailand. And Thailand is also quite an important investor in the region, or some of the key Thai companies like CP are. And the project will be undertaken by geographers and anthropologists. I should say human and physical geographers, which is important to geographers, but maybe not to everyone else in the room. From ANU, from University of Sydney and Uni of Copenhagen, and also with our network of long-term collaborators in the 3 focal countries there as well. So together we'll be gathering data at maize farms, at feed mills, and at broiler chicken farms, and essentially kind of look in detail at 3 nodes within this broiler chicken complex, but as well as sort of broader political economy analysis. So I'll map that out in a moment. And we also have an advisory group, which I think I've touched on already, which involves people from a broader range of disciplines. And they've already sort of been involved in the grant preparation process and helping us think through some aspects of the method there. I'm really sorry that that figure is all pixelated. Simon witnessed me trying to improve it and reinsert a nicer resolution version of that, but I think it's good enough to read for now. So this is a schematic that shows, I guess, our 4 project aims across the top, which broadly translate to work packages. And the schematic diagram there speaks to especially the second work package. So let me run through that. So the first work package, which is shown in purple there, involves mapping the broiler complex and related chemicals for our focal countries. So this is about looking at how national production of broiler chickens sits within global supply chains. What are the key chemicals in play and who are the key actors involved? For instance, one major company that I've already spoken about that cuts across all 3 countries is CP, Charoen Pokpan, a Thai company. So CP is a global and a regional player. I think it's something like number 7 in the world for chicken production. And they have their fingers in everything from manufacturing maize seed for cultivation and agricultural inputs through to contract-based farming, and they also operate contract-based chicken farms and invest in large factory farms as well. We'll also look at regulatory frameworks for agrochemicals and the poultry industry in those countries and kind of the state corporate relationships in that space. The second work package in red there kind of also relates to the more detailed mapping of methods in the figure. So this includes social and scientific research to understand chemical practices and their impacts or effects. So the social research will aim to understand local practices around agrochemicals and knowledge of risk and regulations. We plan to use photo voice with farmers as part of this. I can say more on that later if people are interested. And at the feed mills and chicken farms, we'll be talking to, I guess, company operators, but also we're interested in interacting with labourers who we might be able to access through kind of unions, but sort of figuring some of this out still. And we have quite a large science component within that work package to test for the presence of things like heavy metals and other chemical contaminants, which are shown in that right-hand corner there, as well as antimicrobial resistance. And my colleague Beck Hamilton at Uni of Sydney will be leading that part of the project. She'll work with national colleagues to take sediment cores, which are shown in the figure there, from maize farms, near feed mills and near poultry farms. So these are taken kind of in still bodies of water, and they provide a really amazing record of the chemical history of that area. And you can even check things like antimicrobial resistance within that, and when and if that appears in the profile. We'll also gain chicken manure, shown with that lovely graphic there, and meat samples to look for chemical residues and antimicrobial evidence of antimicrobial resistance within those. So some of this work is well outside of my usual sphere of, of operation, and it's going to be, I'm pretty excited to see what comes out of some of that, but it's probably not something I can explain in a lot of detail. Beck is going to be the lead on that, different Beck. Yeah. So the aim here will be to try and really assess and understand chemical risks and the environmental and biological changes associated with the broiler chicken complex. Then the third work package there in blue, basically drawing on this nationally based research, will undertake comparative analysis, which will aim to look at things like how inequality and risk intersect, for instance, around social variables like gender, caste, ethnicity, amongst others. And we'll also try and build a picture of environmental change, which is kind of Beck's real interest, and health risks associated with the broiler complex. And the final work package there in green is about starting to think about what options might exist to address some of these risks and reshape regulatory frameworks or approaches within this sector. And I guess, you know, we don't have a major, I guess, resource allocation around that, but I think we'll use our networks and also facilitate dialogue with some of the key players in this to explore alternatives. And I guess, you know, highlight any interesting experiments or approaches that are being trialled within our focal countries. All right, so that is the project as it stands. It's a pretty brief walkthrough, so I'm happy to elaborate on aspects of it, except maybe the really sciencey analysis bits. So yeah, I guess in summary, the scope of this broiler chicken complex probably looks quite large. It encompasses environmental change, trade networks and changes, cultural and socioeconomic changes, changes in consumer expectations. And it's got a range of quite expansive and significant, potentially significant and ecological effects around things like polluted soil, water, air, biodiversity loss, pandemic risks and antibiotic resistance. And we think that the social and non-human implications are equally consequential. So the project's aiming to sort of respond to that broad challenge with a focused engagement in 3 countries where we can examine these chemical entanglements around the broiler chicken industry. And yeah, so doing that through sort of local, national, regional, and deep time analysis, which is kind of Beck's work. Considering the political and economic contexts, inequality, and ecological change. So that is it. We're commencing in October this year. And yes, really happy to connect with people around the project, if anyone's interested. That's it.